Sometimes I would look at verses like James chapter 1 that says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds, knowing that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. And perseverance must finish its work, so that you may be found mature and complete, not lacking anything." And I would look at verses like that and think, okay, I realize that's the standard. Romans 5 says something very similar about facing your trials, rejoicing even when you face trials, because you'll develop character through it. And I would think, okay, somehow I need to find joy because this trial is actually God's process of making me a better person. But I would then think, okay, I know that's the standard, but how? How am I supposed to do that? And so you would think, okay, well, I'm just going to determine, I'm going to make up my mind, I am going to rejoice. I'm going to find joy. I'm going to enjoy this trial. And if you've ever tried that, you found that doesn't work. Perhaps you've tried a different route where, well, I'll count my blessings, and this is where somebody looks at you without any clue of what to say, and they say, well, at least you have your health. Except sometimes the trial you're facing is actually your health, and other times, even though you do have your health, the trial you're facing is so significant you just kind of want to smack the person for saying that to you, because it doesn't seem to touch the point. I love this passage in Habakkuk, because I think what the prophet does here for us is he reminds us of where our orientation is supposed to lie. Where do we find the strength? Yes, the calling is there to take joy out of the situations where you're facing trials, to find that what makes us different is that we rejoice in the midst of those things. Jesus even gets more specific in the Sermon on the Mount and says, when you're being persecuted, when that trial is very visibly coming from the fact that you're a Christ child, at that point you should rejoice in the fact that you're facing persecution. How do we do that? Habakkuk says that though the fig tree should not blossom, there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no fruit, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls, though he would be left absolutely destitute, yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. I don't want you to miss something here. There's a critical word that I love that's in here. It's the word exalt. We a lot of times confuse that with the word exalt with an A, E-X-A-L-T. That means to worship, to honor, to lift up, to praise. And we might even think, okay, I could do that. In the midst of my trial and in the midst of my suffering, I can acknowledge God is God. He deserves worship. I can give that worship to him. But exalt, E-X-U-L-T, is different. Exalt actually means to find jubilation in, to find satisfaction in, to rejoice over. In fact, it's what he repeats. It's kind of a parallel statement. I will exalt in the Lord, rejoice in the God of my salvation. He's putting those two things together. And so to exalt actually means to rejoice. And the source of his rejoicing is not, well, I'll try and find some things that are going well in my life. No, it's directly in the Lord. I will find my joy in the Lord. Specifically, I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. Takes the focus back to the gospel. Notice this is an Old Testament passage that is telling the Israelites that in the moment of depression, in the moment of feeling destitute, in the moment of feeling like I don't have anything that I used to have, the focus is then to turn to the Lord who has saved you, the God of grace. When you're facing a trial, it's important to remember not just the fact that you, even in the midst of the pain and the difficulty and the misery you're facing, it pales in comparison to that which you deserve. The torment of hell so greatly overshadows any of the difficult things we're enduring here in this world that it just pales by comparison. And so when we focus on the God of grace, we're reminded that he took our ultimate penalty away so that, yes, we're suffering on this world, but we are not suffering to the level that we actually deserve in and of ourselves. But it's also important that in looking at the gospel to realize that Christ did suffer. Though you are suffering and you face agony right now, your suffering also pales in comparison to the sufferings that Christ endured, to that which he took upon himself, that God poured out all of his wrath upon Jesus on the cross. And he was actually separated from God in the moment of his sin, that he bore our sins upon himself. He faced punishment that you do not have to face. He suffered in a greater way than you would have to suffer. But Romans 8, also bringing that gospel picture into it, says that it's also important to remember that the sufferings of this present age pale in comparison to the glories to come. The day is coming when suffering won't be a part of this world. Suffering will not be what we as Christians face. The day is coming when all of that will be removed and we stand in the presence of the King who has won our victory. And when we hold on to those things, our faith is deepened and strengthened, and it is through the power of the gospel that we're able to consider it pure joy and see the result of becoming more like Jesus in the process.